there was a time where the morals of the church was reflected in American society. Those days are gone, right?
Absolutely.
For example, most people my age don't believe in waiting until you get married until you have sex. I'm one of them. I am one of them,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm not doing it. Now, that said, it is the doctrine of the church that you should be waiting until you get married to have sex.
Mm-hmm.
What should the church's approach be to like that issue? Because it's not just that. It's clearly when you look around and you see, because like churches do child christenings and you can clearly see these people ain't married. Now I'm not saying you shouldn't do the christening. That's not what I'm saying. The child
Mm-hmm.
is an innocent life. That's not my. But I'm saying the church can see all of this premarital sex going on, and so there's two criticisms. The one criticism is people believe the church should change their morals, and I think that's insane. But the
Mm-hmm.
opposite criticism is, and this is going to sound crazy coming from me, is that the church is kind of muzzling themselves by avoiding touching on certain topics. You rarely hear a preacher preach about uh, children out of wedlock anymore. Really, at least for me. I rarely hear those sermons about children being born out of wedlock. I rarely hear sermons about um um you know uh uh, uh like domestic violence and things like that, right? Like, so things happening in the world, and maybe, who knows, maybe there's no place in a sermon for it, but it does seem like if the Bible is telling you to wait till marriage, it kind of seems weird that there's no one preaching about waiting till marriage anymore, because they know in the back of their minds most of their members are getting it on.
You need
What do you say?
you need to hear me preach. Listen, let me tell you. I listened to some of your podcasts, and I'm telling you, sometimes I wish it was like a live, so I could just comment while I'm going through listening. I just was listening to a podcast that you was talking about with Shannon about Little Shop of Horrors,
Great movie, by the way.
and you were talking about the two separate beds.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. And of course I heard, the same thing back then, I Love Lucy, same thing. They
Hmm.
had two separate beds, whatever, because the morals now, anything and everything goes.
Yeah.
Society has, I mean, now I started watching some series on Netflix and on Amazon Prime and Hulu. And literally the last couple of series that I have watched, the first 5 minutes of episode one, season one, is sex.
Yes, yes, yes. It's bad. It's bad.
It is, I mean, it is ridiculous. It is so much, it's like being pumped into our minds through television. And so, whereas I could be just fine right now because I'm talking to you, all of a sudden I'm looking at a commercial and or something, and I'm like, oh my god, now I done got my flesh done crazy, it woke my flesh up.
Hmm.
So that was on my mind, whatever. The church, I think that it depends on what church you go to. There are some
Okay.
preachers that are still preaching it, that are still preaching against, things, or trying to preach morals. I'm definitely one of them. I'm not going to preach it all the time because there's a lot of things others to preach besides that, but I will touch on some of those things in a few of my messages. Um, Society itself is one of our biggest enemies,
Mm.
because what we as a church teach as moral, the world teaches as, or what we in the church teach as immoral, the world not only teaches as moral, but um it's too prevalent. Before, it's in everything,
It is.
in music, it's in television, it's on social media. So this is what so it's like we're trying to fight against this institution, and we're actually weaker because they have more power, they have more money, they have more, to advertise and to promote their agenda. Um, it's a moral breakdown. There are reasons. One of the things is that we say don't do, but we often don't tell why. And a lot of times it's not until after it's been done that you find out this is why I should have never done this. Okay. You talked about premarital sex, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons why uh, 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 it would be, I don't want to say against, but against the scripture. Let's just say it like that.
Yeah.
Because if you believe the Bible, you believe the Bible. If you don't believe the
Yes.
Bible, then this does not relevant to you. Um, um, Number one, sex leads to children. That's the most obvious thing.
Yes.
If you don't have your two parents, if they're not married, then that child is being raised in a house without both parents. That's not a good thing. In all actual, I mean, you're blessed. You have both your parents in your house.
Yep.
I didn't have both my parents in my house. I grew up, my mother left my father when I was 3. Not that I did not see him, often. I did see him, but I wasn't in the house with him. So there are some things that I should have learned by example of my father, by having that man figure in the house, that I did not learn. My father saw me ironing one time as I was an adult. He said, "How you iron that? That ain't the way you iron that, right?" Well, I mean, if I'm ironing because this is the way my mother irons stuff, whatever. I don't, and that's just something simple. That's something simple.
Were you ironing pants?
I was actually ironing a shirt.
Okay, with me it was pants. My father walked by and saw me ironing pants. He's like, "Boy, I was getting ready for church. Like, boy, what you doing?" Because I wasn't ironing with the creases the right way.
Uh-huh.
So he's like, "I'm gonna iron some church pants."
Yeah. So, and then there's some things that my father taught me later on in life that I should have probably learned a little earlier, or would have learned or seen by example. As far as taking care of my shoes. Making sure the heels are good on my shoes or whatever and whatnot. My mother, and I'm 44 years old, I've never had a sex talk from any of my parents. Never. My cousin told me about it when I was in school back when I was 19, but I never had a sex talk with none of my parents. Now, the thing about it is that I have a son, and I wasn't married when I had him, and he's in another house, and I'm here. So I don't care about being a single parent. I'm gonna raise my son. No, a child should have both parents. That's the purpose of. That's one of the benefits of marriage. STDs. We still don't talk about STDs as much as we should. I don't know if what the schools are doing about them.
No.
But I mean, I've talked to some older teenagers that didn't know they could get an STD by oral sex.
Because they don't take, at least in certain public schools around where I live. I still live in the Bronx. I didn't move one up yet, but they don't give you, to your point, we learn about STDs, but it is spoken about with vaginal sex. But to your point, you can get these same STDs through oral sex, but it's not hammered into these children's heads the same way vaginal sex is.
Right. So we have that. And then when we get into some deeper things, the more people you experiment with, when it's time for you to settle down, and I think I've heard this on one of your podcasts as well. The more people you experiment with, the more you're going to compare your spouse to all of your previous experiences, your prior experiences. That's not a good thing either, because what that person may not can do, you have to say, "Oh well, so and so you may not say it out loud. You're saying in your mind, well, so and so used to do this better than me, and she ain't doing it right, whatever. So after this, I'm gonna just do this, but I might have to call so and so because I like that feeling or whatever." So that is another detriment to experimentation with sex.
See, everything you're saying is perfectly logical, and I agree with all of it. So if someone was to say, "Okay, well, Jabaya, you are nodding along with everything he's saying, then how come you aren't going to wait till marriage?" Number one, it's too late for me. I'm not a virgin anymore, so that's one. But I could always stop and choose to wait for marriage. I don't know. For me, now I can't lie. I just don't see me committing my life to somebody before I have sex with them. Number one, it's this is one of the cases where how I was raised goes against my logical brain now. It sounds illogical for me to commit my life to somebody without having sex with them. Sex is a very important part of your life when you're in a relationship with somebody. To not know what sex is going to be like until you die with somebody, it, it, no, I can't do it. That's number one. Number two,
you don't want to do it. Don't say you can't. You don't want to do it.
Yes,
you can.
Totally right. I choose not to do it. That's one. Two, look, man. Now this is, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but the Bible is a collection of scriptures, and some of these scriptures are pertain to word given. I think the popular saying is the Bible was written by men inspired by God. But what is not talked about is the King James version is King James's version of the Bible, and so some of this stuff people don't realize there are books of the Bible that aren't in the Bible. There are scriptures that are not in the Bible, and so some of the things in the Bible, and this is Jabai's personal belief, I believe some of the things in the Bible were placed in the Bible because of people in power wanted their subjects to behave in a certain manner, and I don't believe it has anything to do with getting you into heaven. Now, I have no idea if the sex thing is part of that. I could just be using that as an excuse. Probably am, but yeah, it feels wrong. Now, I'm not somebody that's out here just out here slinging it. That's not me. But I don't know. I just don't feel. I don't feel like. And then even getting married. You know how I feel about getting married. Like it just doesn't seem like a good deal for men in 2020. It just seems like you're just risking somebody taking half your stuff. You don't know. So it's like I have to get married before I have sex, even though it's not biblical time. So 70% of divorces are initiated by women that could just take half your stuff. And so why would I might not want to get married in the first place? And so all of these things are taking place. And this is my worldly side thinking, even though I was raised in this religion, but when I look at it logistically, I just don't see any reason why I should not be having sex with somebody until I marry them. Now, given all that, and most people my age will not verbalize it the way that I'm saying. They're just never going to talk. But you know that most of these people in church are having sex outside of marriage. I think you know that.
Of course they are. Yeah, of course they are.
So what should the church's next step be, knowing that, or should there just not be any step at all?
Well, you can't make grown folk do anything. As I say it, and I tell my church, what you're supposed to do, you do what you're not supposed to. You do what you don't want to do. I can't make nobody do anything. I'm not a police. I'm not gonna be knocking on people's door to see in their house.
Okay.
I'm not following people, and I don't even. I think I follow some of my members on social media. I zip tie them. I don't really, some of them I unfollow actually, because I don't want to see things that aggrieve me. But only thing we can do as preachers and as a church is give the word and set an example. I totally understand. Again, I had a child. I wasn't pastoring when I had my child out of wedlock, but I was preaching. I was a minister. So but you can't make people do anything. You can't. Only thing you can do is give them what the scriptures say, give them the consequences and the pros and the cons, and people have to make their own choices between them and God. This whole walk is between you and God. I'm just there as a messenger, as a spokesperson. So that's my little. That's now I will say this. Um, and I don't even know if I should say it, whatever. the topic, the topic of sex in I don't know. Some things, some things you can't
I
really
know.
tell people
I
because
know.
they'll
Out of
take
context. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
Um, but let me say this: the purpose of the main purpose of sex, especially in Bible times, was to procreate.
Yes.
Of course, you had the benefit of enjoyment with it, and that's why men, especially back then, especially in the Old Testament, they had more than one spouse.
Yes. They had concubines and plenty of
They
wives.
had
And yes.
okay. I'm just teaching in Genesis now in my Bible class, and Jacob had two sisters, Rachel and Leah. They were sisters. Okay, they were sisters.
That's wild, man.
Okay,
Wow.
and matter of fact, Isaac married his cousin. You know, and then on top of that, they were young. They were like about 12, 13 years old.
Teenagers. Yeah.
Exactly. It wasn't 20s and 30s or whatever when the time they got married. And then they had and then Jacob had concubines too. His two other wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, which he had the 12 children, the 12 sons of the Israelites, the tribes, from four different women.
So when
Okay.
does the monogamy stuff come up? New
Let
Testament?
me tell you.
No, the New Testament? Or does it not come up at all?
It,
I want to know.
I wasn't trying to go there today. It kind of does come up in the New Testament.
Okay.
But if we want to be technical, it's not against the Torah. It's against United States law. It's not against Torah. I haven't seen it if it is, but I can't go around telling people this. I hope, a lot of people ain't listening to this podcast. We want people to listen to the podcast, but
No, look, and look, like I said, everything you said was dead on as far as there are way more cons probably than pros to having sex outside of the confines of marriage. But I think the context that you put it in, people don't speak about the fact that they were getting married like right around the time you start having those feelings were when people got married back in those times.
Yeah.
Versus now we preach abstinence, not realizing that we're asking people to be abstinent because we discourage getting married until you're like 30 now.
Right.
It's
a long time.
Yeah. Putting the marrying age now to like 30 versus, back in those times when it was like 13, 14, 15, you're asking people to wait an extra 15 years with those feelings that they can't express because they're not married.
And that's how I got in trouble.
Yeah.
That's how I got in trouble. It was I didn't have sex until I was 29, 30 years old. And I mean, all these years, come on here,
Yeah.
But I finally did, and then a year later, I had a son.
Yeah, because you're not thinking straight. You got all that pumped up energy inside.
You wasn't thinking straight, and I couldn't get out of there fast enough.